My name is Grace Ellison, and my father once taught me, never take what doesn't belong to you. Yet he was the one who told me, return that purse, then leave, and don't come back. But that purse wasn't simply a lost item, and I wasn't simply someone under suspicion. This story began after my mother's funeral. But the ending? That was something they never dared to face. The October air in Haverfield carried the scent of dying leaves when I returned to my childhood home for the first time in 3 years. The small town hadn't changed much. The same weathered storefronts, the same cracked sidewalks, the same suffocating sense of everyone knowing everyone else's business. I parked my rental car outside the modest 2-story house where I'd grown up. Its blue paint now faded to a dull gray that matched the overcast sky. I was 38 years old, a freelance writer living in Portland, and I felt like a stranger in my own hometown. The house looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile somehow, as if grief had physically diminished it. Mom had been gone for 2 weeks now, and I'd deliberately stayed at the Comfort Inn rather than under the same roof as my father. Some distances feel safer to maintain. George Ellison answered the door with the same stoic expression he'd worn at the funeral. At 64, he was still a tall man, though his shoulders had developed a permanent hunch. His hair had gone completely white since I'd last seen him, making his pale blue eyes appear even more distant than usual. "Grace," he said simply, stepping aside to let me in. No embrace, no warmth, just acknowledgement of my presence like I was a utility worker come to read the meter. The living room felt like a museum of my mother's life. Her reading glasses still sat on the coffee table next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. Her favorite lavender cardigan hung over the back of her chair. The familiar scent of her vanilla candles lingered in the air, though I knew no one had lit them since she died. My sister Meredith was already there, sitting at the dining room table with several cardboard boxes arranged around her. At 35, she had always been the practical one, the one who stayed local and visited every Sunday, the one who'd inherited Mom's sharp cheekbones and Dad's methodical nature. She looked up when I entered, her dark eyes assessing me with the same cool calculation she'd used since childhood. "We need to go through Mom's things," she said without preamble. "The estate lawyer says we have 60 days to inventory everything for probate." I nodded and took a seat across from her. This was why I'd come, not for reconciliation or healing, but to fulfill this final obligation. We spent the next 2 hours in relative silence, sorting through decades of accumulated memories. Mom's jewelry went into one box, her books into another, her clothes into bags destined for charity. It was Meredith who brought up the purse. "There's something missing," she said, pausing in her examination of Mom's dresser contents. "The burgundy leather purse, the one she kept in the bottom drawer. It's not here." I looked up from the photo albums I'd been sorting. "What purse?" "The one with the gold clasp. She always kept it in the same place, wrapped in tissue paper. Mom told me she kept her important jewelry in it, her wedding ring, Grandma's pearls, the sapphire earrings Dad gave her for their anniversary." Meredith's voice carried a subtle accusation. "She also kept her savings bonds in there, the ones worth about $15,000. My father, who had been quietly emptying Mom's nightstand, suddenly looked up. "She mentioned that purse to me too, said it was her emergency fund in case anything happened to her." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I felt their eyes on me, waiting for some reaction, some explanation. The weight of their suspicion settled over me like a heavy blanket. "I don't know anything about a purse," I said carefully. Meredith exchanged a look with Dad. "You had keys to the house. You visited her alone several times before she died." "I visited her because she was dying," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. "I came to say goodbye." "We're not accusing you of anything," Dad said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "We're just trying to understand what happened to it." But I could see the accusation in their faces, feel it in the way they'd positioned themselves on the opposite side of the room from me. In their minds, I was already guilty. The daughter who'd moved away, who called but didn't visit enough, who'd always been different from them. It would make sense that I'd take something that didn't belong to me. Meredith leaned forward. If you know where it is, Grace, now would be the time to speak up. We're family. We can work this out. The condescension in her voice, that careful, patient tone you'd use with a child caught in a lie, made my stomach turn. I stood up slowly, grabbing my jacket from the chair. I don't know where your purse is, I said. And I don't appreciate being treated like a thief in my own childhood home. No one's calling you a thief, Dad said, but his words felt hollow. Meredith stood too, her voice taking on an edge. Look, Grace, if you took it, just bring it back. No questions asked. But if you didn't, and it just disappeared, well, then I think it's better if you don't come back here. At least not until this gets resolved. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. I looked at my father, waiting for him to defend me, to tell Meredith she was out of line. Instead, he stared at the floor, his silence speaking volumes. I see, I said quietly. Well, then I guess this is goodbye. I walked out without another word, leaving them with their boxes and their suspicions. As I drove back to the hotel, I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just felt numb. Like part of me had been surgically removed without anesthesia. Back in my hotel room, I sat on the bed and stared at the bag I'd brought from home. Inside, wrapped carefully in a soft cloth, was a USB drive and a piece of paper covered in my mother's shaky handwriting. Help me feel safer, sweetheart. 3 months before she died, when the cancer had spread to her brain and her lucid moments were becoming fewer. Mom had asked me to do something unusual. She'd called me into her bedroom and spoken in a whisper, as if afraid someone might overhear. I'm scared, Grace, she'd said. I keep forgetting things, important things, and I'm afraid someone might take advantage of that. She'd asked me to install a small camera in her bedroom, nothing invasive, just something that would record if anyone came in when she was sleeping or confused. It would help me feel safer, she'd explained. Knowing someone was watching over me. I'd been hesitant at first, but seeing the fear in her eyes had convinced me. I'd installed a tiny wireless camera on her bookshelf, positioned so it would capture most of the room while remaining virtually invisible. She'd been so grateful, squeezing my hand and saying it was our little secret. Now, sitting in the sterile hotel room, I connected the USB drive to my laptop. The folder contained dozens of video files, organized by date. I scrolled through them, not sure what I was looking for. Most showed Mom sleeping, or sitting in her chair reading, or talking to visitors. Then I found it. The file was dated 5 days after the funeral. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. In the grainy night vision footage, I could see someone moving quietly through Mom's room with a small flashlight. As the figure approached the dresser, I recognized the silhouette immediately. Meredith. I watched as my sister carefully opened the bottom drawer and removed something wrapped in tissue paper. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing a burgundy leather purse with a gold clasp. She opened it, looked inside, then closed it again and slipped it into her own bag. But that wasn't the most shocking part. As Meredith was leaving the room, another figure appeared in the doorway. Dad stood there, watching her. He saw her take the purse, he saw her put it in her bag, and he said nothing. He just stepped aside and let her pass. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. They had both known exactly where the purse was. They had orchestrated this entire charade to make me look guilty, to drive me away with shame and suspicion. But why? I scrolled through more files, looking for answers. Then I found another video, this one from the day after I'd installed the camera. Mom was sitting in her chair, and she was talking to someone off camera. I increased the volume. I need to tell you something. Meredith. Mom's voice was weak, but clear. I've been thinking about what happens after I'm gone. Don't talk like that. Mom. Meredith's voice responded. I have to. I want Grace to have the emergency fund, the bonds in my purse. She's struggled so much with her writing career, and she's been so good to me these past months. There was a long pause. Then Meredith's voice, careful and measured. What about the will? Mom? Everything's supposed to be split equally. The will covers the house and the bank accounts. But the emergency fund, that's separate. That's mine to give to whoever I choose. And I choose Grace. I continued watching as Mom explained her reasoning. Grace had been the one to visit during the hardest days. Grace had been the one to hold her hand during chemo. Grace had been the one to listen to her fears about dying. Promise me you'll make sure she gets it, Mom said. Of course, Mom, Meredith replied. Whatever you want. But even in the grainy video, I could see the tension in my sister's posture, the way her hands clenched into fists. She had promised, but she had never intended to keep that promise. I closed the laptop and sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the rain had started again, drumming against the hotel window like fingertips tapping impatiently. I thought about driving back to Portland, about leaving this whole mess behind me. But something Mom had said in another video file stopped me. Grace has always been the one who sees me, she'd whispered to the camera during one of her confused moments. Really sees me. Not just the sick woman, but me. I owed her more than running away. The next morning, I drove back to the house without calling first. I parked in the driveway and walked up to the front door, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder. I didn't knock. I still had my key. Dad was in the kitchen drinking coffee, while Meredith was in the living room, going through more of Mom's things. They both looked up in surprise when I entered. Grace, Dad said, setting down his mug. What are you doing here? I found something you might be interested in, I said, placing my laptop on the coffee table and opening it. Something that might explain what happened to Mom's purse. Meredith's face went pale. What are you talking about? I turned the laptop screen toward them and pressed play. The night vision footage began to roll, showing Meredith entering the room, taking the purse, and leaving while Dad watched from the doorway. The silence that followed was deafening. Meredith stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Dad's coffee mug slipped from his hands, shattering on the kitchen floor. This is... Meredith stammered. This is what really happened, I said calmly. Mom asked me to install that camera because she was afraid someone might take advantage of her condition. She wanted to feel safe. Meredith's shock quickly transformed into anger. You had no right to spy on us. I had every right. Mom asked me to. She was scared, and she was right to be scared. I paused the video on a clear image of Meredith holding the purse. She was scared of you. Dad finally found his voice. Grace, you should have told us about the camera. Why? So you could make sure to avoid it when you decided to frame me for theft? We weren't framing you for anything, Meredith said, but her voice lacked conviction. I played another clip, the one where Mom explicitly stated she wanted me to have the emergency fund. As her voice filled the room, explaining her reasons, I watched my sister's face crumble. She changed her mind, Meredith whispered when the video ended. She was confused. The cancer affected her judgment. She was perfectly lucid when she said that, just like she was lucid when she asked me to install the camera. I closed the laptop. She knew exactly what she was doing. Dad slumped into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 64 years. We thought it would be better if the money stayed in the family. You have your career, your life in Portland. We're the ones who stayed, who took care of her. You took care of her because you chose to. I visited her, I called her, I loved her from a distance because that's what my life allowed. But that didn't make me less deserving of her final gift. Meredith stood up abruptly. Fine. You want the money? Take it. Take the purse and everything in it. But don't expect us to welcome you back here with open arms. I don't want your money, I said, surprising them both. I never did. I just wanted you to know that I'm not a thief. Then what do you want? Dad asked. I looked around the room one more time, at the furniture where I'd played as a child, at the walls that had witnessed both love and dysfunction, at the two people who had raised me and then betrayed me. I want you to know that I see you, I said. Really see you, just like Mom saw me. I left the laptop on the table and walked toward the door. Neither of them tried to stop me. "Grace," Meredith called out just as I reached the threshold. "What happens now?" I turned back one last time. "Now you get to live with what you've done, just like I've been living with what you accused me of." I drove back to the hotel and checked out, but I didn't head straight for Portland. Instead, I made one more stop. Haverfield Cemetery occupied a small hill on the outskirts of town, its weathered headstones standing like crooked teeth against the gray sky. I found Mom's grave easily. The fresh earth was still dark, the temporary marker small and plain. Someone had left flowers, though they were wilted now. I knelt beside the grave and placed the USB drive on the soil near the headstone. I didn't leave a note or explanation. Mom would understand. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "I helped you feel safer. And I made sure they couldn't take advantage of you anymore." As I stood to leave, I noticed something that made my breath catch. 2 plots over, there was another temporary marker, this one bearing my father's name with only a birth year etched into the metal. The death date was blank, waiting. He'd already bought his plot, right next to Mom's. They would spend eternity side by side, just as they'd planned, but I wouldn't be there with them. There was no third plot, no space reserved for the daughter who'd dared to leave, who'd chosen a different path, who'd seen too much. And for the first time since I'd arrived in Haverfield, I felt genuinely free. The drive back to Portland took 6 hours. I spent most of it in silence, processing everything that had happened. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I just drove, watching the familiar landscape give way to new horizons. When I finally reached my apartment, I found 2 messages on my answering machine. The first was from Meredith, her voice tight with controlled anger. "You got what you wanted. I hope you're satisfied." The second was from Dad, and it was brief. "The money's yours if you want it, but I think it's better if we don't see each other for a while." I deleted both messages without responding. Over the following weeks, I tried to return to my normal routine. I worked on my articles, paid my bills, met friends for coffee, but something had fundamentally changed. The weight of family expectation, the burden of being the good daughter, had lifted from my shoulders. I felt lighter, but also strangely unmoored. A month later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was the burgundy leather purse, along with all its contents, the jewelry, the savings bonds, a few old photographs, and a handwritten note from Mom that I'd never seen before. "My dearest Grace," it read in her careful script, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And I hope you know how proud I am of the woman you've become. You were always the bravest of us, the one willing to face difficult truths. Don't let anyone make you feel small for that. The money is yours, but more importantly, the freedom is yours. Use it well. Love, Mom." I sat in my kitchen, holding the note and crying for the first time since her funeral. Not from sadness, but from relief. She had seen me, really seen me, just as I had seen her. I deposited the bonds and used the money to take a 3-month writing sabbatical. I spent it working on a novel, not about revenge or family dysfunction, but about a woman who learns to trust her own perceptions in a world that constantly tries to gaslight her. I never heard from Meredith or Dad again. No phone calls, no letters, no attempts at reconciliation. The silence spoke louder than any apology ever could. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if I'd been too harsh, if I should have been more forgiving, more understanding of their pain and desperation. But then I remembered the feeling of being accused, of being treated like a criminal by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. They had made their choice when they decided to frame me. I had simply responded to that choice with the truth. 6 months later, I received a call from a lawyer in Haverfield. Dad had died suddenly of a heart attack. The funeral would be small, family only. Was I planning to attend? I thanked him for the call and hung up. Then I sat at my desk and continued writing, the afternoon sun streaming through my window, the sounds of Portland life humming outside. I was exactly where I belonged. There would be no reconciliation, no dramatic forgiveness scene, no family healing. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. And sometimes, that's exactly how it should be. The story Mom had wanted me to tell was finally finished. Not the story of a lost purse or a family mystery, but the story of a woman who learned to see clearly. Even when the truth was painful, especially then, I closed my laptop and made myself a cup of tea. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to old wounds and older grievances. Inside, I was finally, completely free. The phone rang again. I didn't answer it. Some conversations are over before they begin.